welcome to the temple. Let's meet Mary Magdalene as Death Maiden. I think in Mary Magdalene's story, one of the main aspects that really gets left aside is her role as a death maiden, as a death doula, somebody who knows the sacred arts surrounding death, somebody who knows how to hold somebody, prepare somebody for one of the most challenging times. And of course we can look at this in terms of reality, actual death, especially when it comes to Jesus's story where she is with him at the foot of the cross, etc. But we can also see this in more perhaps modern terms, although I think that Jesus and Mary would have probably seen it this way as well, is when we go through any experience in life that causes a death of the ego, a death of the perceived self, in order to gain those higher levels of consciousness, those deep inner knowings as well, to connect with parts of ourself, our soul seed, so that we can really come to a place of peace and truth within ourselves. And I think that Mary Magdalene is one of the ways that we can connect in with this side of ourselves, this side of ourselves that needs to go through the death and rebirth cycle while we are on a spiritual journey, while we walk in this life, as we learn from the experiences that we go through, the relationships we have, the challenging times, the good times. I think that Mary Magdalene is someone that can guide us and hold us through those things, because she has been through them herself and she has guided others through those times. So I think that Mary Magdalene, especially with her revival in recent decades, I think she can have a kind of very soft or even a sensual aura around her. I think people speak of her a lot in that way, but I see a part of her that is very dark, that is very strong, that is hardcore, somebody who is not afraid to look at the darkness, the dirt, the sweat, the blood. She's not afraid of those things. And if we actually read the Bible and what it says directly about her, some people might be tempted to say that she is the one who anoints Jesus before his death to prepare him for that. And there are quite convincing arguments as to why it might well be her, even though the Mary that does that is not directly named as Mary Magdalene in the Bible. But we do know that she is with Jesus at the foot of the cross. She is the one of all the disciples that doesn't leave him. She stands and witnesses that. And if we can for a moment place ourselves in her position, whether you think she had a relationship, a romantic relationship with Jesus, Yeshua, or not, or whether you think that this was somebody that she wholeheartedly believed in and looked to for spiritual guidance, was very, very close to, or one human being just witnessing another human being going through what Yeshua was going through at that time, being crucified on a wooden cross, to bear witness to that, to be inches away from that takes a fortitude. It takes a deeply ingrained spiritual practice, a calmness of mind, of soul, of heart, of spirit, to be able to witness that and to be there for that person, no matter how hard, no matter how heart-wrenching, how sickening, how unbelievable. To sit and witness that takes such strength. And that is what she did. And then after that, she goes to the tomb with special oils to carry out the burial rites of those times. She is learned in the arts of death. She doesn't flinch from a dead body. She doesn't allow her grief to keep her away. She faces that. And for those of us who have visited loved ones once they have passed away and we've seen their bodies, we know how frightening, upsetting, how alien that can be. And let alone then to place hands to wash a body, to anoint a body, to wrap a body. It's very hands-on, earthy, gritty work that she's doing. And then there's a really interesting interpretation of her gospel in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, where it is perceived that she is discussing the 7 powers that she overcomes in order to, for her soul to overcome the inner sort of barriers and demons that she has to reach enlightenment. There's a wonderful interpretation that says that actually the person describing that is Jesus, and what he's describing is his 3 days descending, his harrowing of hell. And that because of their strong connection, Mary Magdalene is actually able to traverse that with him on the spiritual or in the imaginal realm. And this interpretation comes about because the Gospel of Mary Magdalene is missing, I think, 1 to 2/3 of its papers, its papyruses that it's written on. And we have a section where there's a dialogue and Jesus is the last person speaking, and then we have a whole chunk missing. And then when we pick back up again, the person speaking is only referred to as the soul, and we don't actually get an introduction to who is saying these things. So is it Mary recounting her experience, her teaching that Jesus has given her, or is it Mary speaking, telling the other apostles what Jesus has told her? So we don't really know. So again, that is a really interesting link to her spiritually going through the harrowing of hell with Yeshua. But even if we don't interpret it that way, we can see that if she is the one going through and battling these 7 powers, that we can interpret that as an ego death, that she is going through these 7 overall powers that as souls in human bodies we all have to face, and she is facing them one at a time, each head on, and overcoming them. And we can liken that to an ego death for what we do, what we go through when we do deep spiritual work. And also these 7 powers can be linked to the 7 gates of Inanna, Ishtar, the goddess, where Inanna turns her ear to the underworld and decides to go down there. There's variations of that myth as to why she goes down there, but she heads down to the underworld and she has to go through 7 gates, and she has to strip a piece of her clothing or jewelry in order to pass through each of the gates. And this myth is older, much older than the writings than we have from the Bible, and we can see that direct link of going into the underworld. And when Inanna gets there, when she gets through the 7 gates, her dark sister Ereshkigal kills her. And so we can see a correlation between the 7 gates of Inanna and the 7 powers of Mary Magdalene, and Mary Magdalene taking on these powers like a warrior. The goddess Inanna was the goddess of war, among other things, and so we can see Mary Magdalene taking on this role of warrior, facing these powers as they try to take her down, and she doesn't let them. And there's an interesting part in the 7 powers where the one of the powers calls her man killer. Where are you going, man killer? And that can be interpreted as the fact that she has shed the ego, the the things that make us think that this is who I am, and it gives us things like pride and stubbornness and doing things that aren't good for us. And she sheds that. She kills that part of herself, just as Inanna is killed. She kills that part of herself and ascends on her spiritual journey. And so there's a direct reference there again to death of a kind. So I do see Mary Magdalene in this way. I think she has this dark, fierce side to her that is not afraid to get her hands dirty, is not afraid to do the things that other people shy away from. And especially when we're on a spiritual path, there can be a lot of emphasis on staying in the light, love and light always, concentrate on the good. But the truth is that life just isn't like that. Especially not in the world we're living in today. We have so many challenges. We have so many things being put upon us all the time, making us feel that we have to be a certain way, act a certain way, say a certain thing. We have lots of temptations for our time, our money, our energy, our love, and our affection. And it becomes us to challenge these things and to look at the darkness, because there is so much of it in the world. There is so much of it. And it is just longing for us to look at it and give it the love that it needs to bring it into the light. But if we don't look at it, if we don't face it, it grows and it grows. And this is the part of Mary Magdalene that I think can get overlooked, is this fierce warrior, this fierce death maiden, willing us to look at the things that we don't want to, the things we think we can't cope with, to look at them and come to know them and come to love them, to release them, as she does, as she goes through her 7 powers. When she's being challenged by each power, she doesn't argue. Her soul doesn't argue with these powers. It simply just states that, look at you, you're the one that is judging, you're the one that is stuck and bound, not me. Her soul cannot be drawn into argument. It cannot be drawn into pity for the self, into loathing for the other, into fear. It can't be drawn into the darkness because it looks at it. The soul looks at the darkness. It remains in love. But we have to look at the darkness first before we can ascend. So if there is something that you are struggling with, struggling to look at, to come to terms with, ask Mary Magdalene to be with you, to hold you through that, to witness you through that, as she did with Yeshua. That is her role. It's one of her many roles. Ask her to be with you, to guide you and to hold you. And look at those things and be brave as she was. Don't be afraid. Don't flinch away from the dirty work that we have to do as physical beings on this earth. I hope that was inspiring. Many blessings.